In the last video, I talked about using an actual true HDMI signal coming out of my system. And I started to get some of that working, and it definitely had issues. In this video, I'm going to kind of pick up from there and show you the output. I actually have this working well. What I do have working well is two independent outputs, and one I'm going to show with a DVI HDMI output. The other is with a true HDMI output. Now, one thing I do not have working yet is running both simultaneously, and I'll talk about that towards the end of this video. But I thought I would just kind of show what do I have, what did I do, and the setup I've got right now, I think, at least for me, from my perspective, is pretty clean, and I'm getting a nice output. What I'm going to do is nothing with this. This is the VGA output. So maybe looking at my board real quickly, this output here, this VGA output is this window. I'm not going to do anything with that in this video, so I'm going to close that. This video output here, this HDMI, is my primary output. That's this one here, and it says HDMI in. And I'm just capturing that with OBS, coming into a HDMI capture on my computer. This window here that says HDMI 2, that is the secondary HDMI input. And those are the two inputs I'm going to use as I go through some stuff here. So let me set this out of the way, and I want to remind everybody and give credit to Samir here. So Samir Puri, I'm using this GitHub content that he posted for generating HDMI signals. And that is really super helpful in what's making all of this work. But I'll show you how I got it all integrated in at this point, and the result I think is pretty good and might be helpful for any of you that are coming from maybe a Digilent type of video setup and want to switch it to true HDMI instead of using their DVI to RG or DVI to HDMI output. So I'm going to jump into Vivado, and let's see if I can get the right one here. So what you're seeing here is my current project, and this section right here is the section I've had in this basically this block design for a while that's doing my primary HDMI output. And the section right above it, and you're going to notice it looks very similar just by looking at the layout of it, is my true HDMI output. And what I'm going to have for a result is that these will show up as a true frame buffer in Linux and can be used as my video output in Linux, and specifically PetaLinux is what I'm using here. But I'm going to start by walking through this output here, which is using this Digilent. It's an RGB to DVI video encoder. And I'll back up from this and just kind of walk through this set of work that I've got. But if I look at my board here, again, this is all driving the primary output. So I'm going from my Zynq-7000 out through this HDMI port. That is what you see over here. So I've got this TMDS, I've got the clock, I've got it's a differential clock and then differential data, 3 pairs. And that's coming out for this TMDS that's driving this HDMI output, along with the I2C to query the monitor and things like that. Now, if I back up on this and I go look at my video output, let me get that pulled back up. This is the video output on that right now. One other thing that I have, and I'm going to be doing a bunch of window shuffling as I go here. This just saves me a ton of edit time later. I also have a USB serial connection to this unit that's running right now. And so this is a live, feed of that. And this is the live capture of the HDMI. And then this is a USB serial connection to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually reboot. I want to show you this output, the primary HDMI output. I'm using this component from Digilent. And I just want to show you what that behavior looks like. So here's this, and I'll do a reboot because I don't actually have it on a screen that it comes up to. So I'm going to let that reboot run here. and I'm missing my USB serial output. I don't know why. I'm going to close that and reopen it. Maybe I've had it open too long or something. Okay, I'm going to actually reset it. I want to start this up from scratch. So, okay, that's going to go through the boot over here. This is my output to the right. And what you're going to see as it boots, at some point it says it's loading Digilent HDMI right there. That's when it loaded the driver for that HDMI. It's the one that's the RGB. It's basically a DVI HDMI output. But what I now come up to is this. And so this, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is a desktop called Matchbox. So I've configured that up, and it almost seems like it's a tablet version of Matchbox. As I try to do some research on it, I don't find this exact user interface, but this was one that I believe was in the PetaLinux stuff that I added into my build. And I got rid of the X11 stuff, so I actually uninstalled a bunch of that out of my PetaLinux image. But this is what it boots to now. And so my system boots to this, and this is an alternative to, I was also previously booting up Weston, running with Wayland. Now that I can still run, and you can actually see I have a choice for it. I have an icon here. I can choose to run Weston if I want to. And I've got some other things that are just in here so far, and I'll probably play around with adding things later and getting the right icons. And I know I'm missing some icons. That's what some of these errors back over, get my other mouse back down here are, because I don't have some of the icons in my image. But it gives you the idea. So for example, if I want to go into this text editor, I can just click it, and now I have a text editor, and the performance in here is actually pretty good. And I can switch between windows. So if I had other things opened up, for example, maybe I come over here and I open up a terminal, and I'll come in here and open up, I think I can open up another terminal. So now I've got two terminals running and a text editor, and I can flip between them. And like I said, the performance of this is pretty good. So I'm using the USB mouse plugged into my board through a USB port over here, and I can now work with this. Now, something I can also do on my keyboard, I can hit Control-Alt-F1, and that will take me out of that user interface and take me right into Weston. So now I've got the full Weston user interface if I want to do something in it, which if you've watched my previous videos, I don't have a lot in here. I have some basically emulators, like a terminal emulator here that I can work with, a little file management tool, etc. But Control-Alt-F2 gets me back to this other environment. That does have a Weston in it also, which runs it in a window inside of this, which performs even worse than Weston does by itself. I can also come in here, and I'm just pointing some of this out so you kind of know what's in here as I go through this. I can also come in here, there's my VLC media player. I can also come in, there's a hardware, lets me kind of see my system a little bit. So I have a USB thumb drive plugged in, I've got my SD card plugged in. And you can see the cores and things like that. So just starting to show some of this, my Ethernet, etc. Okay, but this is the UI now that boots up on this system. And so that's the UI I'm using. And as I go through the rest of this, this is the UI I'll play around in. Switching back to my other mouse here, coming up and looking at this block diagram. I am using, on that HDMI output, so this HDMI output here, I'm using this component. And this, I think, is a pretty old component from Digilent. And it takes in certain signals and outputs that HDMI. And that has worked well for me, and that's what I've been using. Now, if I back up, it is fed by a few things. There's this AXI4 streamed video out. If I keep going left, there's a video timing controller so that you can programmatically change resolutions and timing, things like that. I have this little converter that takes in the stream of data and reorders some of the bytes because the output, I must have something not entirely configured correctly when I built my board. So I'm just adjusting for that as far as color, which bytes are which color. And so all this is doing some shifting of that, which you can see here. But if I keep going left, I then have this dynamic clock generator. So that's where I can change the clocks, and that can basically work along with this video timing controller. and then this stream that's coming from this video direct memory access get into this over here, which is my stream to video, and output to this component, which outputs the HDMI. But these are all the components, and I thought I would just take a minute and walk through how I have these configured. So a few things that I might point out is I continue to do simplification of my build here in this block design. My processing system, I have 2 clocks, and I ended up having a 100 megahertz and a 200 megahertz clock. So the 200 basically I'm using to go over here, memory controller basically to work with that, is a clock running into that. And also I have this 200 megahertz reset, processor system reset. But then when I come down here, I'm doing this at this faster speed, this smart connect to get to memory and things like that. But then I have another, the 100 megahertz, which I'm using for other things. Now, maybe the way I can tell some of that, this here is this HP0. I can look at the clock for HP0 and see that it's going down to clock 1, which is my 200 megahertz. So that's just how I can start to see I'm running some of these Axie Smart Connects at different speeds. I've got a couple of them, but that's the one I want to run as fast as I can. So that's running at 200 for now, which seems to be running just fine. Then I come over to the right, and again, I'm using this dynamic clock generator. I think maybe at some point I might, I don't know, we'll see, I might replace that, but this is also from Digilent. So this is, if you walk through their examples of their HDMI output on their boards, they're probably going to be using this dynamic clock generator along with this component over here to the far right. Both are from them. But then I'm using an Axie Video Direct Memory Access, and maybe let me pull up the properties here. I'm not going to take much time on these, but in case you are trying to match up any of this, I'll pop the screens up real quickly so that you can pause and read through those. But maybe on the VDMA controller, a little bit more that I've done with just tweaking this. So I'm using 2 frame buffers. I could go to 4. It just takes a little bit more memory. That's not a big deal. I have a gig of DDR on this. This is how I have my write channel, my read channel configured. So 32-bit write. I've got the burst at 64. I can probably bump the read burst up too. I have the line buffers maxed out. I'm going to experiment now with backing those down now that I have everything working, and kind of see at what point do I run into issues, if I do at all, as I pull that number down. And then on the advanced, this is how I have my frame sync and gen lock settings set. So you can take a look at that and match that if you are working through this. Now, if I go to the right, then I have this video timing controller, and the way I have it set up is that I'm saying max clocks per line of 2048. So I'm going to be running 1280 by 720 is the resolution I'm working with, and so that plus the pixels that are not seen on the screen. So there's a visible 1280, plus there's a few hundred more, 200 to 300 more that make up the full line. That all fits within 2048. So I set this to 2048 as the max. I chose resolution of 720p, and then I can get into my frame sync. Nothing that I've changed there. Okay, then that gets me over to this stream out, and this is how I have my stream out set. And then finally it gets me to this component here, which there's not a whole lot to configure, and I think these are all defaults inside of that. You can look at this. I will maybe try to get this posted here. I haven't posted a version of my block design in a while. I'll try to get a PDF of it and maybe the project itself in case you do want to track down any of these wires. But maybe some quick comments on some of this. I'm pulling in a reference clock up here. This is a 100 megahertz clock. I can validate that real quickly there. Pixel clock, this is to drive the resolution I want to run. And so I know this is a dynamic clock generator now, but I'm going to be using 1280 by 720 resolution. And so this pixel clock is like a 74.25 megahertz. And then there's a clock that's 5 times that. And then there's a locked signal that comes out of this that just says, once this has its clock up and running stable, then this goes high. And I'm actually using that as a reset for this output. So basically once that clock goes high, it takes it out of reset and lets it start running. So it's really waiting for a clean clock. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on another part here in a bit. Oh, and then let's see, on this video timing controller, then, I'm connecting in control of it so that you can programmatically manipulate that. Same with up here, but those are going to tie back to like this Axie Smart Connect is how I'm going to programmatically work with those through their drivers. I got clock signals all over the place. Then I've got the timing information going out into the timing information of this Axie for streamed video out. This would be a Digilent component, or not a Digilent, a Xilinx, AMD Xilinx component. And it has to pull in the video. And so the video, again, is going to come back from over here, which is from this video direct memory access. So I'm going from the VDMA. I'm changing the order of some bits around because my colors were screwed up on my design. I think is the reason for that. I think I see that though I could be wrong, but I think that's in Digilent's example too. But anyways, I know I need to have that to get my bits ordered correctly. And that brings that in over here. Out of this then, it's generating, I've got my data that passes through. It's also generating the sync signals for the video, an H-sync, horizontal sync, and a vertical sync. Then if I keep going down, I think that's most of it. There's also a signal that says out of the, whatever it is, 1500 pixels wide, when I'm within the 1280 that are actual, real pixels to show on the screen, there's a signal that indicates that. Those are all being fed into this component from Digilent. And that gives me the video output that I'm using. Now to use this, there's a bunch of drivers that have to get loaded. So there is a Digilent driver for this dynamic clock. There's a Digilent driver for this, basically this video output over here. And then of course there's going to be Xilinx drivers for some of this, like the video timing controller and the video direct memory access. And I do have my DTSI file open, and let me go to that. And so in this, there's a lot of important details that have to be matched up pretty well. But when I go through this, here's an example of the Digilent driver, and I have that enabled right now. And there's all these settings. So I'm going to scroll through this. Again, I'll try to get this posted in the coming week or two in case people want to use it as a reference, because it took me a bit to kind of track down and just get all of this stuff dialed in to work well. But you're going to have a DTSI entry for that Digilent component. That's the far right one that I was showing. There's this Xilinx PL, or programmable logic display driver that also needs to get configured in here. Plus there's going to be I2C for doing connection of the HDMI out to the monitor to kind of query what it can do for resolutions and such. There's the video DMA that has to be configured, and in my case I've configured it and said I'm going to do 2 frame buffers, and here is my resolution. So it's a 720 wide, or 720 high, so 720 high, and then it's 1280 wide by 4 bytes per, so 1280 times 4 is the horizontal size, and that is also what goes into this stride value. And then there's the dynamic clock, and you got to make sure you get all your clock names right as you set this up. And then there's this timing controller that also has to be configured. So there's a lot that's got to go in there to make this all work. But the output then is what you see over here. So I can get back to my output that when I boot up to it, and it looks like I maybe have no video. Let's see, this is HDMI in. I'm going to hit a key on that, and it looks like the screensaver is working, which is great. So that must be built into this, so it blanks the screen. But now I can continue to use this. Now when I hit Control-Alt-F1, I told you that it goes over to this Weston. I can quickly configure it to, there's 2 lines I can modify in a file so that instead of going to Weston, it goes out to a full command line. So that's another option that I have. But I'm going to go back, when I say command line, the console type of thing, full screen. But I think that's good enough on that output. You can see what this looks like. That's all working fine. What I am going to do is now flip to a different SD card. So for the sake of time, I didn't want to do all this and have to edit the video, so I just prepared 2 of these cards, and I'm going to put in a different one. This one, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but there's a little red mark on it. This is my second SD card. And I am going to shrink this one down because we're now going to switch over to my other output. And that's going to be this one here. So let me just shrink this for a little bit and hit my reset. So you saw that blank. You can see that my USB serial is sending data. You can also see the lights flashing down here showing that it's sending data out of it. But this time, instead of finding the digital HDMI, you now see it shows an REHSD HDMI, and my other monitor is working. And the primary is not used in this example, so I'm no longer using this one, and instead I'm using this one over here. And you're going to essentially see the same thing. So this window comes up, and I know sometimes that the top little home gets cut off, and that's on. It doesn't matter which one I use, either output. That's something with this UI, I think. And sometimes it pops into the correct layout here momentarily, but that's not a specific video output issue. I think that's just more something with this software. But that's up and running. Now, I'm going to show you, though, that it's different if I come back to here. So everything I just walked through earlier, which maybe for some of you that was not detail you are concerned with, and I appreciate that, and I just wanted to put it in there, though, for those that might be trying to build this out. What you're going to see now, though, is I have the exact same thing all the way up to this last piece. And instead of using Digilent's RGB to DVI, I now have my own, and I say my own, but I'll show you what it is. It's me packaging other people's stuff. But I have now set it up so that I can come in to my components and I can pull up this component. It just shows up in my IP, and it's sending out the exact same signals, and it's receiving in the exact same signals. And so I can actually take this one down here and delete it and bring in one of these. It's a drop-in replacement, and instead of now sending out the DVI HDMI, it's going to send out a true HDMI signal. But everything up to that is the same. So and when I say it's the same component. So I have another instance of a VDMA, another instance of the clock generator, the video timing controller, the stream to video out. I also am adding an audio clock because I'm going to include audio. So I guess that's one difference, is it adds an extra audio clock. And later I will figure out how I'm going to add in audio data. I've not done that yet, but there should be support within this to do that. But basically it's the same thing. So I've gone through and I've added a second lane here. So I duplicated what was down below and have that all coming across and then going out through my component. Now my component then, let me show you. When I say my, it's really not mine. I will go show you what I did. So here is a separate project, and I mentioned this in the last video. So I have this HDMI. This part down is almost the code from over here, from Samir verbatim. I maybe made some changes. So this is kind of reset from the last video. I came back and I wiped out what I had and maybe trimmed this down a little bit. I took out some of the stuff that I wasn't worried about. I'm only worried about 720p for now, as an example. And here's that full frame width. Earlier I said it was 1280 plus 200 or 300, so it's like 1650 is the precise number. But all of this information in here pretty much is coming from his example. I don't think I'm changing much in here at all, quite honestly. And in the last video I had a wrapper of a wrapper. I had kind of a top module and then a wrapper. I got rid of all that and trimmed it down to just a wrapper. I got rid of the FIFO, and the reason I did that is back over here, there's already a FIFO built into this streamed video out, this component right in front of mine over here. And so it's already doing all of the FIFO work. And this is, this is one of Xilinx's, IPs. And so, the quality is going to be a million times better than anything I'm going to build. So I thought, let's leverage that FIFO. I'm not going to try to implement a FIFO. I don't need to implement a FIFO since I'm using that. But basically, I put in a wrapper that takes in the clocks for the pixel information, the audio. I bring in the data, the color data, which I just call RGB. Some other signals coming in, like a reset, a video enable, and then outputs of the differential clock and data lines for HDMI. And then really inside of here then, this was a small test pattern I was using at first, which is very similar to what was being done in the sample over here. There's a top file. If you back up and then look for top, he does a 1 pixel color border. That was too small for me to see, so I bumped it up to half a dozen pixels for the border so I could see it better. But then basically I'm just wrapping and calling his module, which his module then calls other submodules. But that whole stack up, I came in here and I built up, I wrapped it. Again, I wrapped it, if you watch previous videos, I wrapped it with Verilog instead of System Verilog, because if I want to add it as a custom IP component in a block design in Vivado, I believe it's got to be Verilog. It can't have a top level that is System Verilog. But then you end up doing a create and package new IP, and you can set some properties of that. Like you can see I'm up to version 1.03. I give it some metadata that controls how it shows up. But once that's done, then you go back to your main project, you point to that location where that IP is stored, kind of like IP catalog type of thing. And so typically that's done in your settings. You go into your repository, you do an add, you point to it. And then it now is something that shows up like this. And so that is in there. Now, the nice thing about this, that means I can now go into my DTSI file in the exact same way and put in those components. So I put in mine, I'll just call it mine. I'm wrapping that other functionality, but I come in here and I configure all the properties here. Like where's my clock coming from? I set it to status OK, which means turn it on. And then I set up another instance of this Xilinx PL driver. I keep on coming down. Another instance of VDMA. And again, I got to be careful that I'm giving it a proper address of where that is at. And so as I'm going through all of this, I got to be really careful that back in this project under address editor, I'm looking at all those addresses for these things and making sure I'm using the proper address. So in this case, this is VDMA 1. I come in here, it says VDMA 1 is at 4301. There's my 4301. Then my dynamic clock, again, the same thing, pay really close attention to all these clock names and output names and things like that. And then my timing controller down here. Maybe along with that, I would point out in my boot args, I do have entries for really all that matters is this one here, this HDMI A1. That would be my first HDMI output. I'm setting it to 720p signal with an alpha channel and three 8-bit colors. So a total of 32 bits, 8 of which is alpha, which I'm not doing anything with. And I'm telling it that I want the first frame buffer to be the console output. Now, if I get all of that done, then I have to make sure that in whatever I'm going to use it in this case in PetaLinux, can then see that frame buffer. And so, after I boot up, which is where this is at, I can go to list out in dev and I'll see that I have that frame buffer FB0. In the last video, I showed two, FB0 and FB1 simultaneously, but at that point I was not using, and I'll just talk about this now real quickly. I was not using all of the same components. I had two VDMAs, but all the timing controller, this stream to video out, that was all me doing my own coding on that and not using these components. And so far what I'm finding is that if I enable just this one down here and all of its components, it works great. If I enable just the top one and all of its components, it works great. But if I try to enable everything, it does not work, and I'll have to continue to troubleshoot that and see if I can identify why that is the case. But if I get this all done, then what I get to is something like this. So now again on this, I am on the other output. I'm on this secondary output now, and I have a separate mouse that's plugged into that, which you can see me moving over here, and I have a USB keyboard. But I can now go in and do things like open up a terminal, and again, it's just the same thing you saw on the other HDMI output. It's just now this one. But this this software works pretty well, and I can just see here OBS is not capturing this really well. Maybe I can switch my inputs. Let me try that here. So give me a second. Okay, so now you should be seeing just the output of my screen. Okay, so now here I am full screen. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is get out of this. And maybe I will just reboot this real quickly. So I'll do a graceful shutdown. And let me reset this. So what you're seeing recording right now is just the full output of that secondary HDMI, and basically capturing true native HDMI signals. And right now the system's initializing, and then it comes up and says, okay, please wait, booting. And then from there, it's going to jump into that other desktop environment, this Matchbox. And you can see my cursor, and then up comes Matchbox. And I can navigate around this, and again, like I said, performance seems pretty good. And here I see this run, calibration for the touch screen. So that makes me see, maybe assume that this is some sort of a touchscreen type of app or interface is what it's intended for. If I hit Control-Alt F1, this is back out to here. So now in this case, I can do login, just a full console. Oops, my password is pass, very complex here, but logged in. And now I can do things like, test out my sound and other things like that. Now, let's see if I have this configured. I'm going to go ahead and I have some scripts, and I'm going to run a script that just sets up my audio. And let me just do an ALSA mixer. That all looks fine. I'm going to get out of that. I'm going to do an A play. And in that user bin folder, I have, I don't know, some rock. Okay, so that's playing fine. My noise cancellation might have filtered that out, but it was playing that music fine. So my music's working. But now I'm going to change into the bin folder, and just as an obligatory test here, I'm gonna, let's see, user bin, go ahead and run fbdoom, point it to a WAD file, doom.wad, and nope, that's not going to work because I didn't type WAD. And actually, let's just make sure that file is there real quick. It is. Okay, so fbdoom iwad doom1.wad. Okay, so this is going to spin up a little sound server, and then let me get into playing Doom, which any good video output, of course, we want to be able to do. And again, you're probably not going to hear any of this audio. It's just coming out of my little speakers in front of me, but I'm really just trying to move around for the video output of this more than anything. So as I'm running around, I'm hearing all the sound effects. I don't have music support yet, but I do have graphic support, keyboard support, no mouse support. I can move the mouse, but it doesn't pick it up inside of the game. But graphics here all seem fine, and I'm not sure how much tearing or other things you're seeing. And I don't know, my capture isn't probably the greatest to try to capture this anyways. So, but hopefully you get the idea here. I'm going to get out of Doom now and out to here. I can clear that. And again, Control Alt F2 gets me back into this environment. And if instead of the console, again, if I prefer to have it flip over to Weston, that's a couple of quick lines I can change and change that behavior. But I've got one card set up to go to Weston. I have the other SD card, micro SD card set up to go out to the console here. Okay, let me flip my screen back to what I was showing before. Okay, so this is, I'll leave this window up here. This again is the output that I was just showing in true full screen mode. Now, the one thing I've got to figure out, well, lots of things, but one thing I got to figure out is why can I not run both of these? I do have another SD card setup where I go into the DTSI and I try to enable both outputs, so all of the pieces of it. But then at that point, I really don't get, and actually I can pop it in here. So there's a third one. It's a little black and green SD card. And I just hit the reset on that. And we'll see if we get any video on either of these. And maybe while it's doing that, I am going to reopen my, I do see the please wait booting over there. But then that's it. It doesn't get me to the graphical environment on either screen. And I will do another reset here just so we can kind of see all the things it's doing during the boot. But in this case, what you'll notice, and there aren't going to be any errors, so everything loads up correctly as far as I can tell. And I'll come back to this in a second, but notice it loaded both the Digilant driver and my driver for my HDMI, which by the way is just a copy of the Digilant driver. So actually I might not even need a separate driver, but it seemed like there was some uniqueness in names and registering and things like that. So I had just spun a copy of it. But at this point, let me scroll back up and just talk through my boot here. So going through all of this, I'm just scanning for some things that are related to video. So you might see other things in here that maybe don't matter so much. This again was my command line. So I am saying I've got two HDMI outputs and I'm setting them to 1280 by 720 with 32 bits of color data. So again, 8 of those are alpha. And I'm telling it to use the first console for my, the first HDMI for my console. And let's keep on going through all of this. It gets down to a bunch of this frequency setup, and you can see here this whole section. So it Digilant HDMI, my HDMI, which I called REHST HDMI 2. So you can see it's going through all that. No errors, nothing weird showing up there as it goes through this. I'm gonna go ahead and keep on going. Let's see, don't care about that. So then I get into this whole section that I'm paying attention to. So that's that timing controller, and you can see there's two different addresses here because there's two different controllers. That all looks good. And then the actual, this Xilinx programmable logic display component, those drivers loaded up fine. And I'll keep going. I do have a bunch of this other miscellaneous stuff for, maybe I'll eventually get into using some of it, some software to do video capture, things like that, but I'm not there yet. My audio stuff. Whole bunch of USB stuff, including an external USB thumb drive that's plugged in right now, and maybe just I'll come back to that. Maybe I'll boot back up to a card that works here in a bit. But there's a pretty decent file browser in that Matchbox desktop. Let's see. I'm gonna keep on going. Yeah, so I'm looking. Yeah, and then here's where it had this whole section, which all looks good to me. So it says it's loading, this driver, the digital dynamic clock, the clock 2. I did make a second instance of that driver. It's just a copy of the first one. I don't think that's even necessary. That's some of the stuff I'm going to go back and start trimming down now. But then I load up this Xilinx DRM using the Digilent driver, and then it says, yep, I'm going to set your console to that. This 160, I suppose that's 160 columns by 45 lines is what that's trying to say. And then assigns frame buffer 0. Then it repeats the whole thing for my other driver, and second HDMI output sets it up as frame buffer 1. So, and I think that's pretty much the end of this for the most part. But that does mean if I go out and do a ls dev, I've got both frame buffers. So both frame buffers are there, and from Linux it looks like it should be working, but right now I'm not getting any output on either screen. And if I do a reset, again, I'll see it show up on one of these, the console, the starting, and then it disappears from there. So there's something either when it's loading, I don't know what it is, something in the kernel or something in a configuration that I need to go find and set. I'm going to go ahead and flip out of this one, so I'll just give it a second, and then I'll do a shutdown to be kind of nice. Okay, that's as far as it'll go. Okay, I'm going to pop this out, and I'm going to put in the red marked one. This is then HDMI 2, and that is my secondary HDMI down here. And I'll move these around like so for now. And so I can see it's just loading the REHSD HDMI driver, only giving me FB0, and that goes by really fast, I know, but I'm used to seeing it there. So then I'll back up to the one that is working at this point, and let me just point out a couple of things here. I do know it matters. Let me pull this up. Some things to play with if any of you are doing this, and if you have tips or tricks on this, let me know. But in the Etsy folder, there is an environment, and right now it has these two lines I added, but I commented them out. So a frame buffer and a display. I know changing that does impact. Like right now, if I do a Control Alt F1, it takes me to a console. If I add these two lines, then when I do a Control Alt F1, it'll load up Weston. And so it's just as I think Weston isn't loading right now because it doesn't have some information it needs about which frame buffer to use. So I just comment those out, and then I got a nice console output instead of Weston, which I won't use Weston much. It just is too slow. There's other things that maybe I should point out, and I don't remember where all these files are at, so I'm just going to go into user bin, into some of the scripts I've got, different things that do, like monitoring my processor temperature. And if you're curious where it's at right now, it's, so it's set Celsius, it's low 40s, right? So here's the Fahrenheit, not working too hard. But if I go back up to these, I'll go into nano, and actually maybe I'll do this on this main output. So I'll just maximize this like this instead of flipping OBS over. But if I want, I can pull up the terminal on that. I'm using the wrong mouse to click. So let's do it that way. So I'm going to open up a terminal, and I'll change into user bin. Oops. Okay, and one of the files that I have here is setup.sh. And the reason I do this is because I can really quickly tweak this file in my source image, or out on wherever I'm staging this, or actually on an SD card. So if I want to change some boot up options, I can do it here instead of messing around in PetaLinux, which can be kind of a pain at times. But I do have it set up so that there are some additional files I can copy over. There's an Xorg config file. I still have not been able to get Xorg to run. worried about it. I've got some stuff around my audio, but then I also have a Weston config file. And so that's in this Etsy XTG Weston folder, and I'll go jump into that. And then here's where I have a couple lines that would add those frame buffer entries to the environment if I didn't already have them. But let me go out of that and change into Etsy XTG Weston. And then you can see here that I've got a Weston.ini. And so I can also configure stuff in here. And that's all I'm doing right now is trying to point this out, that inside of this INI file, I can configure my output. So I can come in and say, HDMI A1. And now maybe on, the other card that was not loading correctly, I need to set this to use, a different output or configure this differently. I don't know. But that's the type of stuff I could play around with as I go forward. On the Xorg config, this is the stuff that I have in there currently. And I'm not using Xorg, so I don't know if that even matters at all. But I know if I put the file over there, it does change some behavior. So I'm not putting that file over there right now. Well, I think that's probably about it. If I go back, to here, the goal is that I can use this entire pipeline that you see here. I can go into, and I'll probably do this later after this video, but this one that is using the DVI HDMI output, this Digilent one, I'll probably just delete it and drop mine in its place, and then test that out and see if that works out fine. But I think that should, because really this, what's here and this up here is all identical up to that component. And then again, this component is really simply wrapping the stuff that was over here from Samir. But at the end of the day, I now have on my system 2 outputs. I can choose which one I want to make active. What I'll probably do is get this primary switched over to use the true HDMI signal output, get rid of the Digilent DVI HDMI output, and use that going forward. And then I'll continue to experiment then to see if I can get a secondary output working simultaneously. And maybe in Weston, I can do a true side-by-side screen type of setup. Again, that perform so poorly, I don't know if that's going to be very helpful or not. I do know also that this interface over here, this Matchbox desktop environment, it performs well, and it doesn't show up on the screen very well as I'm moving, but I have a pass through on so what you're seeing here is being recorded through OBS, but it's a little pass-through device that captures plus passes it out to an actual monitor. And my monitor, everything is smooth. It looks great. That's working well. Yeah, I think that's plenty. So I'm almost an hour into this, I see. So that's pretty long. So maybe 45 minutes by the time I trim this down, but hopefully this was helpful. Like I said, I'll try to get some of this posted, so if others want to reference this. I had posted an older video about getting the whole Digilent DVI HDMI output working on a comparable board, whether it's my board or one of their boards. But I'll get some updated documentation out there on this new stuff, kind of where I have it, because it is cleaned up quite a bit. It is running well. And now you have the option of doing a true HDMI output instead of the DVI type of signaling. So that's it for now. So thanks, and drop any questions, comments you've got, and I'll see what's next for me to try to tackle.